So the other day, I was looking around online, scrolling aimlessly, just disintegrating brain cells second by second, as we all do in 2025. And I came across an ad on a local buy and sell website here in Ireland titled Gaming PC Parts. So I thought, why not? Let's have a look. And to my surprise, what I saw wasn't half bad for the price. So I got to talking with the guy, struck a deal using my astounding levels of charm and charisma, and brought back home with me this absolute unit of a PC right here. I paid €150 for this machine. And inside this absolutely disgusting case, and I mean absolutely horrific looking, had me gagging at the doorstep of the guy I was buying it from, inside lies an i5-9600K, a very decent little Coffee Lake chip that came out at the end of 2018. 6 cores and 6 threads with a base clock of 3.7 GHz and a 4.6 GHz boost clock. It supports dual channel 2666 MHz DDR4, it's got a 95 watt TDP, which to be honest is weirdly high I think, and it's a K SKU, so of course it can be overclocked for that little bit more performance that you really don't need, but go ahead if you really want to act all smart and fry your computer parts all in one night, you have the option to do so. On top of it sits a Cooler Master Hyper 212 Evo that I reckon desperately needs ripping out of there, along with a fresh application of thermal paste, because when I bought this thing, the guy tried showing me what was inside, and when he opened the side panel, I kid you not, I think I went blind for the next half an hour because of the avalanche of dust that came out. This PC may have been opened up, and I say may have, like no guarantee, it may have been opened up way back when the dinosaurs were still around, but I'm not sure the thermal paste would have held up so great since then. What surprised me a bit more was the motherboard, an ASRock B365 Pro 4, which at the time of release was a pretty decent mid-range board for the LGA 1151 platform. Just one issue though, the B365 chipset doesn't actually allow for overclocking, so I don't know who put a K SKU in here, but I'm sure they were devastated when they found out. Brutal stuff. Sitting on the motherboard, we have two 8GB sticks of 3000 MHz Corsair Vengeance RAM. These have been around longer than I have, I think, and so it's never a bad sign when you see this stuff in your PC. Now, earlier when I said the motherboard surprised me, it's not like I went in not knowing what was inside. Contrary to popular belief, I actually don't rival Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk when it comes to net worth. I know, crazy, right? I mean, that's why I dabble in this budget PC stuff, believe it or not. So I don't just throw wads of cash at anything I find interesting. However, there was something I left a mystery. The only thing I didn't know about was the power supply. I forgot to ask about the one thing that could burn my house down. Now, luckily my office space is still very much intact and not a pile of ashes, meaning this Superflower 700 watt unit is not too bad. Now, when I first opened the side panel up, the first thing I scavenged for was the power supply, and I was pretty disappointed when I didn't find a typical 80 plus bronze certified budget power supply from EVGA or Corsair or something like that. But I did do a little looking around and found that Superflower is actually a pretty reputable Taiwanese OEM power supply manufacturer for companies like EVGA. However, I couldn't find much information about this specific unit, but I am a bit more confident now knowing that it was not made by Al-Qaeda, which is a nice thought. And then finally, a little surprise was left in here that the seller never specified, and that was this 7200 RPM 500 gig Samsung hard drive. I mean, if we're talking about selfless giving, I think this guy takes the cake. I mean, have you ever been gifted something as special as a 500 gig hard drive? I mean, I'm just tearing up thinking about it. Let's move on. Let's just move on, man. Now, you may have noticed that I haven't mentioned a graphics card yet, and that's because there was none. The seller wanted another 200 quid for a 1660 Super, and you can bet your nuts and your granny's life savings that I wasn't taking him up on that offer. Instead, I found a GTX 1080 that I picked up for 90 quid, bringing the total to just €240. Now, I haven't been parts hunting for a while now, and not to toot my own horn or anything, but €240 for a PC of this caliber, an i5-9600K, 16 gigs of RAM, and a 1080 sounds more than decent. Guys, I'm all for staying humble, but I might just be the greatest to ever do this. This is the Gigabyte Turbo OC variant of the GTX 1088 gig. The GPU has a base clock of 1633 MHz and a boost clock of 1771 MHz. Not the fastest 1080 out there, but a very decent one nevertheless. Now, what probably has you asking a few questions in that big brain of yours is the fact that it's a blower style card. It doesn't take a genius to point out that blower cards generally don't typically have the best reputation when it comes to cooling. They tend to run hotter than the sun and also louder. So when benchmarking, I do want to pay attention to that as well as everything else. Alright, with all that being said, let's get to benching. No, not that kind of benching. I meant games. Benchmarking. Starting off with Assassin's Creed Mirage, I accidentally ran the first benchmark on the highest settings, but why not show it here anyway? We got an average of 59 FPS, one short of 60, just makes me want to put my head through the nearest wall, 1% low of 32 FPS, and a 0.1% low of 25. In the more crowded area portion of the benchmark, you could see the CPU usage shoot up to the mid-90s. I think that's where more threads would have probably helped with the 1% and 0.1% stats, but everywhere else we looked GPU bound, and I'm not too dissatisfied with that. At high settings, we had a much nicer sounding 75 FPS average, but unfortunately the 1% and 0.1% lows weren't so nice, 36 and 27 FPS respectively. But I think that's more down to the benchmarking tool rather than there being any stutters or slowdowns, because looking at the footage, the only time the frame rate dips towards the 1% lows was at the beginning while the world was loading in. So take that whatever way you want. But yeah, looking at utilization, there doesn't seem to be any major bottlenecks either side here at 1080p. Both the 1080 and the 9600K seem pretty evenly matched. And towards the end of the benchmark, we see the GPU peak at around 73 to 74 degrees Celsius. Next, we got Cyberpunk 2077 with the high graphics preset. Obviously, ray tracing isn't a thing on these GTX cards, so that's not on here. A silky smooth 78 FPS average is what we get, with a minimum of 63 FPS. Nothing much to say here, the game looks and runs great, and the 8 gigs of VRAM hasn't been a limit just yet. Higher settings would definitely have been on with this card. However, at the end of the benchmark, the 1080 does hit 79 degrees. So clearly this blower 1080 gets pretty hot pretty fast. I mean, this benchmark's like what, a minute long? 80 degrees is no joke in that time. The thing is though, the card seems to have a very non-aggressive fan curve, so hopping into Afterburner could probably fix that. And also I forgot to mention, I didn't clean or repaste this card. I just chucked it in the system the second I got it home. So I'd assume getting some dust out of that heatsink and repasting will probably do wonders. Next up is a notoriously badly optimized game, but one I loved very much back in the day, and that's Batman Arkham Knight. At the highest graphics preset, 16 times anisotropic filtering, and all fancy effects and particles on, this game looks great, and we got a very welcome average of 93 FPS. And of course a minimum of 40, but again I really think that 40 isn't really indicative of anything much because it really showed up from the beginning of the benchmark when loading in. Looking at the actual live frame rate, I think it dipped under 60 like twice, and that was by 2 FPS if I'm not mistaken. So very happy with the performance here for €240. The GPU temps creeped up once again, peaking at 82 degrees this time. A bit too hot for my liking, but again, like I said, not much can really be made from these temps because the card is dusty and the thermal paste is probably indistinguishable from cement. Finally, I'm testing a classic, Rise of the Tomb Raider. I call it a classic because I'm being performative. Truth be told, I've never actually touched this game for the fun of it, but a lot of people have, so let's go and benchmark it for that reason. All settings, of course, absolutely cranked to the max. This isn't exactly a new game. This game was actually at times bottlenecked by the GPU, and then also at times by the CPU. In total, we got an average of 121 frames per second and a minimum of 14 FPS. In the geothermal valley portion of the benchmark, where clearly we were CPU bottlenecked, 12 threads would have definitely brought up the average there. But I'm not sure about the minimum. Again, seems like a benchmark fault. Have a look at the frame rate throughout the benchmark. No stutters, and I never really saw a dip even remotely near 14 FPS. So yeah, for 240 quid, I'm very satisfied with what I just saw. Yes, it would have been nicer to have had an i7-9700 in here for the hyperthreading, or just a Ryzen 5 3600 combo if I found one for a similar price. But of course, then you'd want faster RAM than just 3000 MHz. That costs more money, and if you go down that rabbit hole, we all know it ultimately leads to bankruptcy, so let's just calm down for a minute. The single core performance of this 9600K in late 2025 is still pretty incredible. Nothing to complain about there. On the other hand, for the GTX 1080, I really do think this is like a new budget king contender, at least around here in Ireland, where you can actively find these things for under €100, and if you have better negotiating skills than a literal rock, you can probably bring the price down a little further. The 1080 did peak at 83 degrees Celsius throughout the whole benchmarking period, which wasn't very long, so I'd expect a few more degrees in a longer sustained period of use, maybe 85 to 86 degrees. But of course, that's without the cleaning and repasting, keep in mind. And the card really didn't get very loud. I've never used all too many blower style cards, but some people make it sound as if it produces enough noise to cause an apocalyptic event, when in reality, yeah, it does sound a bit louder than my Asus Dual RX 6700 XT, but that thing's virtually inaudible, so no, it's not bad at all. So all in all, was the cheap gaming PC worth it, and would I recommend you put something like this together for yourself? For the price? Of course. But if you go any higher, I'd start looking for hyper-threading, or at minimum a power supply that won't make you question whether you'll lose your CPU, motherboard and house the next time you play a cheeky game of Roblox. But yeah, that's about it. If you enjoyed the video, plenty more just like this will be on the way soon, so be sure to like and subscribe. But on that note, thank you so much for watching, hope you have a great night, and I'll catch you all next time. Bye bye.